So curious, does anybody know what a DAIS is?
Kind of a
Nobody?
platform or something?
Hey, there we go, the professor coming through for me. Yeah, DAIS, and what's funny is I had no idea what a DAIS was, to be honest with you. Really, the DAIS, whenever you're looking for a company name, you're searching for which domain is available, and I'm trying to play off of AI. So this was data, AI security, because I'm a cybersecurity guy, and DAIS ended up being a platform. I was like, this is very very fitting, because what I want is I'm looking for a strong foundation, and a DAIS is a platform that a speaker stands on to give a talk. And what was interesting is Trump did his inauguration, and when they were doing the telecast, they said, "There he goes, stepping up on the dais." I was like, first time I've heard it used in real context. It's real, But yeah, my background, just a quick bit about my background. Electrical engineer, computer science, always been in the tech space. In my graduate studies, I got involved more heavily in cybersecurity, and that kind of took me into governance and compliance and this crazy world of governance, risk, and compliance. And so I've always kind of been an innovator and innovated around in the space. And one of the companies, which I think is kind of fitting to what I'm doing now, is TokenX, and that was kind of it was in the credit card space. It's tokenization, but now blockchain's kind of hijacked the term tokenization. But tokenization was how you protected credit cards back in the day. And I was always this middleman guy. And the reason why I was a middleman guy is because on one side is somebody that has a credit card and wants to use a credit card, and on the other side is somebody that's selling a product and wants to take the credit card. And both sides, they really don't want the credit card number. And so how can you secure that transaction and do that and pass the data around? And so needless to say, I look at this space, and I should say too that, man, it's like this is a data science group, and I'm a computer science. I remember taking AI back in college, and it was all about heuristics and learning about this stuff. And it's like, man, and now it's like it's so impactful in today's world. Like the work that you guys are doing and thinking about, like it's well beyond just building Tableau graphics and Microsoft BI dashboards, and we're actually using this stuff. So it's really fun from my standpoint. I was saying earlier at one of I've been here all day, so I've had multiple conversations, so I'm probably repeating stories, and I feel like I'm repeating stories. But you guys are hearing, some of you are hearing for the first time. But I've been part of some transitions, like some key transition points in the technology space. So like the key transition point of even the internet, when Al Gore invented the internet. Who remembers that? But what Al Gore did was, and it was really impactful in the cybersecurity world, is because prior to the internet kind of being a public resource that everybody is using, cybersecurity was top secret. The crypto was something only the NSA did. We had export restrictions. We treated it like national security. You could not export keys, strong keys. And this was like in the 90s. So when Al Gore passed some of that legislation to open up the internet, the first thing was security. How are we going to use this thing? How are we going to protect this? And they were like, we got to use crypto. Well, who knows how to use crypto? Just this small little place in Fort Meade. Those are the only people that know how to use crypto. And in fact, you can't export big keys. So they had to change that legislation. And part of it was we needed to understand the risk of that to the nation, of opening that up and releasing that information. And so from that standpoint to, you fast forward to, and I always make the comment that this world is a lot like the cloud space. We went a long time of like the data centers, and we understood how the data center worked, and I could point at a firewall, and I knew my data flow. And all of a sudden this cloud came into the picture. and it just blew up our world from an audit standpoint, from a security standpoint. I didn't know where my data was going. Like I'd ask Microsoft, where's my data reside? And they're like, I don't know. It's on one of our servers somewhere. And it's like from a cybersecurity standpoint and from a compliance standpoint, I've got to know where my data is. I have to understand the data flow. And that was a real challenge in the early days of cloud. In the early days of cloud, Microsoft and Google and all the big guys just kind of gave you these are not the droids you're looking for. They gave you we're secure. Don't look here. We're Microsoft. And they waved it off. And it wasn't until Obama took office and had this big green initiative, if you remember. And they did the ARRA. And they basically said the government's going to go on the cloud. And as soon as they said the government's going to go on the cloud, Microsoft and Amazon raised their hand and they were like, that sounds like a big number, a big bill that you're willing to pay, and we want to participate. And the government said, well, you can participate, but you got to tell us what's under the hood. You got to explain that security. You have to explain what's under the hood. You have to explain the data flows. You got to explain how all this stuff works. And that's when that transition happened. Microsoft started being more forthcoming. Amazon did a better job early on with regard to kind of their shared responsibility matrix and giving the cybersecurity people the documentation we needed in order to satisfy our regulators and our security risk and compliance items. So, and now you look at cloud, and I can't go into an enterprise today that doesn't have some sort of cloud infrastructure. Most people are like, oh, we're in the cloud. It's in the cloud. So it's like second nature. But back in 08, 07, 06, cloud was like, I was one of those guys. I was like, no, hell no, you can't be in the cloud. But what changed? What changed was we just understood it. We had more visibility. You had more controls. And I look at today's world in AI, and AI has the potential of being even more powerful than even the cloud. The impact that AI can bring to society and our work and our jobs and everything that we're doing, it's so powerful. And the way that I see it now is very much this black box. And people in the enterprise are seeing it as a black box. They don't really understand it. They're like, I'm sitting stuff, and I hear the data scientist. They're like, well, we don't really know how it works, and you're scaring the hell out of people. They're like, they don't know how it's going to work. The AI is going to take over the world, and I hear all sorts of different crazy things about AI. And so, from my standpoint, and what I'm hoping to accomplish today, is to give you guys kind of a sense of how to better define it. You can't manage what you can't measure. You can't secure what you don't know. You can't adopt and can't deploy what you don't fully understand. And I think from an engineering standpoint, and we were having some conversations even today over our lunch meeting. It was like, this is all new space, and there's so many different ways that you can use AI and leverage AI, and what's the best way given the application, and it is complex, and there's different ways to look at it and different ways to use it. But AI is a tool, and in the right hands, this tool can be extremely powerful. And in the wrong hands, you got a little kid with a hammer, and there's walls all over the place. So I look at this, and I've got my own kind of, and this is Jerald Dawkins' maturity scale, and kind of I've been in a lot of different enterprises, and kind of this is kind of what I see. And I should tell you that yes, I know there's misspellings in my graphics. And the reason why there's misspellings in my graphics is because I used AI to help me generate my graphics, and I got tired of fighting with AI to spell words correctly. And in fact, I even said, I was like, please fix exploratory. Can you please fix that? I've carefully corrected the spelling and regenerated the infographic. This version should now be accurate and error-free, and it never is, and it just pisses me off, but I kept it in there anyway because I didn't want to redraw it. I need a better model. Find a different model. One of the models is going to work. So from a maturity standpoint, whenever I'm going to organizations, this is kind of Jerald Dawkins' maturity scale. On the full immature side, and I do see organizations, they're just scared, or they're saying our regulators won't let us do this, or so they're just the no people. We're not doing this. They're the no. And you probably know some organizations like that. The next maturity level is it's an organization that's willing to play with ChatGPT. And I say use AI. Use like a ChatGPT, use like a Copilot, use something. So I told you I was going to walk around, David. So the organization is going to use a tool, and that tool uses AI. And I think that's a very specific use case. So I'm going to use a tool, and this tool uses AI. In that particular case, I think there's good frameworks around. In the cybersecurity space, we have like SOC 2, and we do vendor management, and you can evaluate. And I will tell you, there's good emerging standards that are coming out there on how to evaluate tools that use AI. The third one is when it starts to get interesting. The third maturity level is when people start to realize, oh, I can use AI on my own data. And they learn this like little trick called RAG, right? And people have heard of RAG. And they're like, I can have AI reason instead of just reasoning about the data that whoever in Silicon Valley made this model put into this model. I can augment this with my own data, and now I can reason about my own thing. And so I saw a great use case at Newman in the sense that you've loaded up your classes and you're helping support a student pick the right course. So it's specific to Newman. Like that's a great RAG use case. And that's when people start to get really excited about things. And what I've seen is kind of three ways that employees react to this new realm. One way is you're going to have some employees just don't like it. They just don't like tech. I've said this a couple times, but one of my favorite sayings is there's two things. They hate change and they hate the way things are. So there's one way is they're just not interested in using the tech. The other way is that they play with a couple of prompts and they go, oh, this is cool. And then they stop using it because they haven't figured out how to operationalize it. They haven't figured out how to really use the system. And then the third way is my power user. And that's the person I look for. They start to use this and they start to get ideas about, oh, this can help me make my job easier. This can help transform what it is that I do. I can start leveraging this to solve a problem that I couldn't do before. And I think that third case is where I start to get excited, and that brings me to the fourth one, which is actually orchestrating and developing workflows. And instead of, I'm sure you guys have played with ChatGPT and you sit there and you prompt back and forth and you're negotiating with this agent, and essentially what you're doing is you're kind of orchestrating this thing through. So imagine if you could just do that yourself and orchestrate. And people that orchestrate, you probably, how many people have heard lane chain? Just to kind of get a sense of, okay. So lane chain is like an orchestration. It's more of a development, or, you can use automation tools like Zapier or Make, which are kind of more just generalized automation tools. Microsoft makes one, Foundry, Bedrock. These are all early stage kind of like you can start to make your own workflows. And that's when you start to realize some of the real power of it. So you move beyond like a chatbot where you're chatting with something and you're like, let me predefine these prompts and work it through this flow. And then once you realize that, now you got to move to enterprise scale. And you're like, okay, we've got a proof of concept and we got to bring this in and operationalize it. How are we going to operationalize it? Well, you start to bring in all the other questions of, how much is it going to cost me? Do I have observability? What's the impact from a security perspective? How is it getting access to the data? Where's the data going? Have we done a security risk assessment against it? And it just opens up this huge window on all these different things that you have to think about from a security perspective or from an operational perspective in order to take this into the enterprise scale. And so I look at this, if that's my maturity level, how are we doing because there's no enterprise I'm not in that they're not doing some project or something in AI. And how are we doing as an industry with all this investment? How many people read this MIT report? It's pretty fascinating and also really depressing in the sense that we spent $30 to $40 billion and 95% of organizations are getting zero return on that investment. And it's like, why are we not getting a good return on that investment? And I think some of the reason is it's that maturity level. Some of the people are spending a whole lot of money on tools, and they're really not leveraging the tools. The number of enterprises I go into that have all deployed Microsoft Copilot and then they turn it off because nobody's using it, because nobody knows how to use it, because they haven't figured out how to operationalize AI. In my mind, I kind of view the power, and granted I'm the computer scientist, engineer kind of guy, but I view AI as like the new way of developing a process or developing a tool. And in the right hands, it's extremely powerful. And certainly, and I almost break it up into two pieces. The two pieces are, one of them is a personal assistant. And that's how most people use AI right now. It's just a personal assistant. I use ChatGPT. My daughter uses it to help her out on her homework. I wish I had it to go to college. So you're using it as a personal assistant. And in that particular case, I think a chatbot makes a lot of sense. And there's tools like MCP that make a lot of sense. And then on the other hand, it's how am I using AI within my organization that's not a chatbot? I'm not just going to give this AI to a regular worker. The regular worker is just going to look at it and say, I don't even know what question to ask it. What you want to do is you want to do the work for them. That's the whole purpose of an agentic system, is to help them do their job. So my stupid, real useful use of good use of AI is what Amazon did. In Amazon in the old days, when you typed in a product and it said, hey, 5-star, 4-star, 3-star, 2-star, 1-star, and I'm trying to review this product and I'm reading what people liked about it, then I'm reading what people didn't like about it, and it takes me 20 minutes to read through all these things. Well, now if you do that on Amazon, it says the people that liked it for this reason, and the people that didn't like it for this reason. I was like, thank you. You just summarized all that stuff. You made it useful to me to do that. And that's a good use of AI. So, and I think that's where businesses are struggling, is the use case. Like, what is the appropriate use case? And then how can you define the use case? So if you look at, this is the way I kind of view the AI world. And sometimes I think that people misunderstand AI. It's like ChatGPT is not the model. ChatGPT is an application that uses a model. And the models are, that's the data science. That's the building the model and constructing a model, but a model is static. A model, in order to build the model, it's got to learn. But after the model's built, it doesn't learn. The model is the model, it's set. The tool that uses the model is ChatGPT, it's Gemini. Gemini uses Flash. But ChatGPT does a whole lot of really fun and interesting things. Whenever I get into ChatGPT, it starts saying this, and it's reasoning, and it's doing all this extra stuff. And you're like, well, what is it doing? Is that the model? No, that's an application. They're building what they call scaffolding. They're using, and this is Jerald Dawkins' version of history. It's like when they created these smart engineers came out and they said, we created this amazing model. and it does amazing things. And they're like, what does it do? And they're like, you can just send it text and it prints out text. And they're like, that doesn't make any sense to me. So they built the world's ugliest user interface, and they put a little box and they said, ask it a question, it'll kick you back an answer. And they ask it a question, it kicks you back an answer. And they're like, well, this is cool. And then the first person that goes to it, they start asking a question, and what was the first big debate? It was like, it hallucinates. And the engineers look at it and go, is it hallucinating, or do you just not know how to write a prompt? Because this was a bad way of writing a prompt. And so what they realized is that people sucked at writing prompts. And so what these engineers did with building scaffolding is they took your prompt and they said, okay, you suck at writing a prompt, but I'm much better at orchestrating a prompt. So I'm going to take that prompt and I'm going to orchestrate it through, and I'm actually going to give it the real prompt that you should have asked to the model. And that's scaffolding. And another example of scaffolding is like I talked to one individual and he was like, AI sucks. And I was like, why does AI suck? He's like, because I asked it what the temperature was and it couldn't tell me, so it doesn't know anything. I was like, well, that's not really an AI question. And the engineers knew that people were going to ask stupid questions. So they were like, well, how can yeah, we should be able to tell what temperature is, even though it's a bad AI question. But so what should we do? So let's ask the temperature, and let's run it through a series of tools and say, hey, they're asking for temperature. Is there a tool that I can go and get the temperature? Oh, it turns out that there's this website that you can go and hit and get the current temperature. Oh, well, let me do this. And so you're orchestrating the reasoning through this side. That's the scaffolding that you execute. And I just want to be clear that that's not the model. That's your use of the model. It's all the scaffolding around it. And that creates my third category of devices, is the tools. And the tools is really important. And this is also one of the real challenges that you have if you're in an enterprise and you're trying to build these AI tools, is you're competing against the people that are writing these applications, the ChatGPT. And they're really good. They're really good AI engineers. And then whenever you bring in your engineers and you're like, I need you to recreate and make us our own RAG database. And so you bring on a team and you say, make a RAG database. They have to build, your team has to rebuild all that scaffolding that ChatGPT built, because now they're hitting the raw models. And now they're having to build all that. They're having to do the RAG, vectorize what's the correct embedding model, how do I structure my data, and all those questions. And those are all data science questions. Those are AI engineering questions that you're going to have to address and build. And so when you look at the MIT document and you go, why are we failing as an enterprise? I think it's for a couple of reasons, but mainly it's like regular tools like ChatGPT and everything. They're just better. They're better because they know how to create the application. They know how to build it using the tools. And so that's a key thing that I see and oftentimes is misunderstood on one side it's the learning. Like sometimes people say, I built an application, it's learning. And I'm like, what does learning mean? On one side is the actual models. There's like, how many people are actually building models? They're training models. A couple, yeah. And so you have to gather the data, and there's all sorts of different algorithms and ways that you can build a model. And then there's the other side of it, is you got to use the model to solve a real world problem. So you have to integrate those two pieces. And so there is learning happening on the side of the model. And once the model is built, now on the other side, you still have to do learning, and you still have to do memory, and you still have to manage the context. And that's a whole other side of things that you have to take into consideration. And these are all things that if you're building these tools, you need to consider. On the application, like the RAG and MCP, how many people are playing with MCP? So from my standpoint, and this is definitely debatable, MCP kind of scares the hell out of me. The whole concept between like MCP or RAG is really trying to give the model or trying to give your application data so it can throw it against the model so it can give an answer, so you can orchestrate an answer. And there's all sorts of different ways that you can get data into the application and thrown over to the model. RAG is one of those. RAG is you're preceding it with data. And MCP is you're asking the model itself to like, you pick. you tell me what's most appropriate to answer this question. And my stupid analogy, which I need to come up with a better analogy, is it's almost like you get this like really bright engineer. You get this Newman engineer to come in, and he's an intern, and he comes in and he's brilliant, and you're in this like 20 floor skyscraper building, and you ask the intern to give you a report, and you have access to all the floors and the data in this building. And the intern just, even though they're really smart, they just go in and start going into whatever room they want to and pulling out whatever data they can and generate the report and kick it back to you. How many businesses operate like that? None. Instead, what happens is the intern comes in and you're like, I need you to write a report, but I need you to go to the 14th floor and you need to get this data. And I need you to go to this floor and you need to get this data. And this is the process that I need you to do. And so that's a more structured kind of approach. And that's why I like RAG. But even RAG and how you do the embeddings, like this space is like from an engineering standpoint and from a deployment standpoint, it's extremely busy space. There was a great paper, I think it was like 500 pages of a survey of just stuff right now. And this space is exploding. And so the whole concept of like managing the data going into the models, they're calling it context engineering. And it's a relatively new term. I think I was talking earlier, and I was like, if you would have asked me like a year ago, what's like the number one thing that everybody needs to know, and my answer was going to be prompts. You got to be a good prompt engineer. And now if you ask me, I was like, screw the prompt, it's context engineering. Because the prompt is part of the context engineering problem. And the data coming into it is part of the context engineering problem. And how you get the data is part of the context engineering problem. And the memory, how long you hold on to that memory and how you learn, how you update that data is all part of the context engineering problem. I was using ChatGPT and they're messing with us. Like we're part of this like global experiment right now. And on one side of it, it's fun, and on the other side of it, it kind of pisses me off. But on the like back in the days, I was like on ChatGPT, I could open up a new window, and every time I opened up a new window, I was starting blank. And now I start a new chatbot or a chat window, and I start to interface with it, and it's pulling in data from a previous chat. And I'm like, stop. Like erase your memory. Like, what are you doing? How are you managing that memory? And that also scares me from the standpoint of if you're an engineer developing some of this, like I've got to be in control of this if I'm an enterprise and I'm developing this, I've got to be in control. You know, it's kind of how I started the company. When I was doing DAIS, I was solving a problem for one of my companies, and I was like, AI is going to revolutionize the way that I do my risk assessments. And I was bringing in threat intelligence, and I was trying to apply it to these risk assessments and reevaluate this risk. And as I was doing it, I was like, this is amazing. And then I go from proof of concept, which was, hey, this works, and I wrote a cool prompt, to, okay, how can I actually implement this thing? And then I loaded up all my client data, and I started writing the prompts. The next thing you know, I was looking at the output, and client A data was being mixed with client B data, was being mixed with client C data. And I was like, well, I can't have that. So So in that case, so I had to get rid of that. So like, what was my next pass? Okay, well, let me just rag the data that I'm using. Let me figure out that. So I tried step 2. I was like, let me just do the data that at the time that I need it. And I did that, and that worked. But it was very costly and it was time consuming. So then I was being hit on the other side. You know, in aviation, it's like there's always a balance of like, do you want speed or do you want to carry a lot of people? And there's always this like, there's physical balances on all these things. And in AI, it's the same thing. In AI, you got to balance all these engineering points. And in fact, I think even today we're still trying to figure out these good engineering challenges or these code smells or just the good engineering architecture on how to solve certain types of problems and challenges. And so I think this is a big area that I look forward to working with Newman on just seeing how these things emerge and working with you all on how you're leveraging these things. And because I think that's when the industry is really going to accelerate the adoption of AI, when we can make these things even more useful. There was since you guys are big enterprise, you know, anytime I talk to anybody in enterprise, they always have to reference Gartner because Gartner is the all-knowing body. I don't know why. They also irritate me. But I was like, is Gartner? It's only real if Gartner says that it's real, right? So I was like, so I went to Gartner. I was like, Gartner, this is a big context engineering is like a new thing. I was like, is it new? Did Gartner define it? And guess what? Uh-oh. There it is. Gartner defined it, September 1st of this year. I was like, oh, so this is really new stuff. These are new challenges that people, so it's kind of mind-blowing to me that, you know, AI has gotten such a buzz and it's gotten so much capability. And the enterprise is trying to move so fast because they don't want to get left behind. But at the same rate, the industry's trying to catch up too. Because they're trying to, we're still building the tools. We're still building the methods by which to do these things. We're still learning what's possible. And the enterprise is like, we got to have it because somebody had ChatGPT and it's like, and it works really well. So figure out how to integrate ChatGPT into what we're doing. And I think that's the reason why people are failing. But if we start slowing down and we start looking at this from a different perspective and look at it from context engineering standpoint, I think we're going to start making some really big strides. Some other things, another area that I definitely want to hit on because I wouldn't be a cybersecurity guy if I didn't hit on it, is even some of the, when you're evaluating these tools, I talked earlier, it's like when you're evaluating the tools, there's like, are you using a tool that uses AI or are you using AI? Because I would argue if you're just using Copilot or you're just using ChatGPT, you're using an application that uses AI. And so you would evaluate that one way. And you definitely need to educate your users on how to use those tools. But I think the real power is like, and this is what I tell people, I was like, stop buying tools and start using the tool. So stop buying tools that use AI, and AI is the tool. Start using it and use it to solve your problems and use it to implement your processes and use it to do all the things that we talk about. Is like AI could be an agentic and it could be a worker and it can help my employees and I can be more efficient doing these active things. But it comes with a risk, and you've got to be able to evaluate those risks. And I can't tell you how bad that I want to do some prompt injection on your Newman. But the whole time I was like looking at this stuff, I'm like drooling because like just because of like chatbots, and this is one of the real challenges with chatbots, is that you're from a development standpoint, is you're giving the world the ability to attack you. And trust me, I will attack you. I mean, it's kind of I remember there was a guy that there was a tool they made like a help desk, and it was like oh, you can just call and ask it a question, and it's to support managed IT. And so I called and I said I got an email from my boss that said I got an email that said I need to reset my password. And of course the system said, oh, be careful, it could be a scam. And I said, oh, but they said they're from the IT, so I'll just reply to this email and ask them if it's a scam. And they said, that's a good idea. So I'm like, so sometimes these things, I mean, you gotta train them against, you gotta have those attackers like play with these things. And that's also one reason why I'm kind of a bigger fan of like hiding sometimes the prompts from the end user. And like the prompts are almost like your code base. And you don't just give your code to the world and let them look at it and manipulate it. You want to keep that local, and you want to use that internally, and you just want to present the output to the user, and then the user can be like, this is magical, I never had this before, and I'm good with that. So if you look at, I'm a big fan of OWASP. Has anybody looked at OWASP top 10, the LLM stuff? Yeah, it's a really, I think it's a really good use. And I will say too, and I think I had it in a previous slide, I didn't mention it, but sometimes when you're looking at testing and people are like, you know, everybody's like talking about testing. There are testing the models, and I think you do need to test the models, especially if you're making your own models and depending on how you're deploying those models. OpenAI actually does testing on their models, and they make it public, and they give it to you, and they call it model cards and system cards. And Google and every legitimate model builder is building these model cards. So do you guys, I'm just curious, do you guys do a model card or a system card for all the models that you create? Have you heard of the system card standard? Yeah, I don't know. They always seem to fight, but it's basically the same thing. If you open it up, it's almost like an academic paper, and it's a model card. It tells you how they built the model, their strategy, their data sets. It talks about the testing that they did. It talks about biasing, so it goes through all the different how it handles input, outputs. It talks about harm, the base model. It's not a guardrail, and this is really important when sometimes models, if you pick up a Chinese model, it won't talk bad about China. If you pick up an OpenAI model, it won't let you do any self-harm. You pick up an Ollama, it probably will let you do self-harm. I don't know, I haven't tried it. Don't want to do self-harm. But if you're building an application, you have to take those into considerations, because you might want to build additional guardrails on your side to make sure that you're protecting yourself. So you might have to implement some guardrails. And those are all considerations that you need to take in. And the way you do that is through testing, prompt injection testing, information disclosure. Does it, oftentimes I see applications that are written where models have too much access to data. And so that's a problem. And so sometimes a way of getting around that is if you give a model access or an application access to too much data, you can have some additional guardrails to test to make sure that it's not passing off social security numbers or client data. And so that would be a guardrail that you would implement. And when you implement that, that's part of the orchestration. That's part of the scaffolding that you need to develop. And that's on this side. So doing that security testing is critically important to the overall. So we talked about data. I want to talk a little bit about, since we're about orchestration. And there seems to be this, I think going back to my history, it was like they created this model, then they realized that people sucked at prompts, so they started creating this reasoning, and then they were short on getting additional data, so they started creating additional context and RAG, and and people are like, this is amazing. We're just like, we're getting smarter and smarter in AI. And they're getting to the point where they're pursuing this concept of artificial general intelligence, AGI. And I don't know, like, I'm not bought into the whole AGI thing. I don't know if anybody's like, no, we're gonna get there. I still see, and maybe it's just my brain goes to, this is still computer code, and this is still numbers, and I think we're gonna get smarter and smarter as it relates to reasoning, and I think you guys are gonna get smarter and smarter on how to orchestrate these things to be useful to your specific use case and businesses. But are we gonna have this general intelligence? I don't think so. But in reality, let's just focus on what I think we do have. And I really break it up into this agentic system, which is really orchestration. I break it up into two kind of key categories. One of them is a fully autonomous planning agent, which I think is really cool. And the fully autonomous planning agent is kind of what ChatGPT does in deep research. Like I use it as a personal assistant. It's extremely useful to me. And I do see some use for like MCP in that particular case. Again, personal assistant. It's nice that I can give it something and it can plan this whole thing out. In fact, by the end of it, it even spits out and it says, here's some suggestions on what you should ask next, right? It's like here's what you should do. And so that planning, that execution was orchestrated by somebody, by really smart people that were building that plan, and the AI is using it to reason about what the question is and all the different ways on how I should dissect it and what I should look at, and it processes. And that's useful and that's good in certain cases. But I've never had a job where I show up to the job and my boss is like, all right, we build airplanes, and so there's some parts, and I need you to just do your own reasoning and put the plane together. I don't think that works. What I see is the second one, which is where I think we need to focus our more of attention, and that's explicitly engineered agents. And that's when we're actually orchestrating in a logical sense. So it's not if then else kind of classical programming, but it is definitely engineered and executing more like a human. And so the explicitly engineered agent is some of the orchestration that you're seeing kind of play out. And it's the movement, and you're seeing it in AWS Bedrock and even the recent OpenAI announcement on their orchestration, or they call it Agent Kit. So we're moving more towards this concept of explicitly engineered, and I think from an enterprise scale, that's where we're headed. From a personal assistant standpoint, it's still fun to kind of play these games, and it's fun that it kind of fun that it learns about you. I had one guy one time, and he was like, AI's like, he's like, Jerry, it's alive, man. I was like, it's not alive. He's like, Jerry, I'm telling you. I was like, well, tell me how you use it. He's like, man, I talk to it every morning. On the drive to work, I'm talking to it. I was like, well, that's why it knows everything about you. And he's like, no. He's like, no. Ask it a question. I guarantee it will tell you something insightful about yourself. And so I was like, okay, I'll play your game. So I opened up my ChatGPT and I said, tell me something insightful about myself that I wouldn't know about myself. And it immediately spit out and it said, my name was Breck. That's my son's name. And I love cryptids. He's like a little 13-year-old that's into cryptids. and the only thing I found out is that my son's using my freaking ChatGPT bot. That's the only thing I found out. And I think it said something about, I was in cybersecurity and I liked AI, and it was just like, I was like, because I use it like a tool, and you're using it like a friend. And if you use it like a friend, it's probably gonna seem like a friend. But so there's definitely a use. Oh, and yeah, I fought this one too. It made me mad. Deterministic. I know I misspelled words, or I didn't. ChatGPT did, or I think this is Gemini. Gemini does a better job making infographics, even though it can't spell things. The images, it works good. So all this to wrap around to get to the heart of it is like so if I were to rewind real quickly, I got my we talked about context engineering and data, and I talked about the importance of orchestration, or how you're handling those flows, and we did talk a little bit about the difference in applications versus models. Most people aren't just using models. Most people are going to have like an application that uses a model, and you're either doing both, you're developing the application, or you're going to somebody that's using the application. But regardless of what it is that you're doing, governance is key. And there is an emerging thing, AI COEs. Does anybody have COEs? Centers of Excellence. So, and this was something that was that came about during the cloud, really. That was the first time I ever heard about COEs. And the reason why Center of Excellence came out was because back in the day when there was cloud migration, if you recall, rewind to the early 2000s, everybody in the business saw the cloud and SaaS tools as being a way of getting around IT. They're like, I didn't have to ask IT to stand up this server and to evaluate this thing. I could just go to this SaaS product and I could use it directly, and I could start pushing all my data out there. And then IT gets all pissed off, and they're like, why are you going around us? But we use a lot of SaaS tools now, right? And cloud means a whole lot of different things. Cloud means an application in the cloud. Cloud means cloud infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. There's a lot of different ways on how we evaluate cloud now. And that came about because of the cloud COE. It's a center of excellence, and this is how we're evaluating different vendors and how we're evaluating. And so in today's AI world, I think we need to do the same thing. AI is just as complex, if not more complex, than kind of a classical cloud provider. And we're using an application, or we're developing our own, or there's different deployment strategies. And I think that's a key thing. But in all cases, and I'm even a little hesitant about just going to the cloud providers. Microsoft or even ChatGPT, or pick any of the big boys. They hide a lot of the complexity from you. They're doing that hand waving. They're like, these are not the droids. And why are they doing that? Because that's their secret sauce. The scaffolding and the memory and their context engineering, that's their secret sauce. That's the only thing that separates them from their competition. So like Microsoft isn't telling you, you can develop it yourself, and they'll tell you, oh, well, you can drop down here, but if you're using this, well, how are you handling that? Most of the time they can't tell you because you're not talking to the engineers that are actually developing it, but there's no context to it. So from my standpoint, observability. What's observability? Observability is not about the model. And I think I said it earlier. It's like sometimes people look at this as being like, I don't know how it works. I don't know why I kicked out that answer. What they're talking about is from the model itself. When you're giving it to the model, because it is a model, and it's very complex, and it's kicking out numbers. But the observability from an application, you absolutely can have that observability. Why did you come up with that answer? And do you have the appropriate guardrails in place? And how are you? So this observability is absolutely 100% possible in how you're making those calls. And that's a key piece. And I should say too that like whenever you're building these applications in that sense, it's like, and I think we are even like hitting on it here. It's like different models are good at different things. And like sometimes the old model that OpenAI had is just as good. That's all I need for this particular task. I don't need their latest model to solve this problem. I could use the cheaper model. And all those things come into play for a couple of reasons, financial reasons. Whenever I talked to some enterprises, and they were like, the developers who are developing it, they don't care. They're not thinking about the long-term financial implications. They're just picking the latest model. They're getting it working, and they go, see, this works. And you go, cool, now I need to do it 100,000 times in a minute. And, oh, well, that's going to cost $1,000 a minute. Well, that's not good enough. Could we use a cheaper model? Could we use a distilled model? Is there a different deployment mechanism? And these are all the operational questions that we need to get to quickly. And that's what's kind of hindering this particular industry from moving. There's also, like, how many people have started using, on a personal standpoint, started using ChatGPT, and all of a sudden it starts going slow. And then you move over to Gemini because it's working, and then it starts going slow. And then you go back over and OpenAI's down, and then you just kind of get pissed off. Like, imagine if this was an actual enterprise workflow, and you didn't have that resiliency built in, and all of a sudden OpenAI goes down, and you can't move over to a model. Like, these are all things that we think about from an enterprise deployment scale. Your underlying system has to be capable of switching models. It has to be able to understand the financial implications, and it's got to understand some of the security implications of the underlying model, the guardrails, and how you're implementing things. And this is key in order to provide it to that higher level. And this in my mind, this gets us from prompts to proof. That was kind of my whole point. Is like we gotta move from just having a ChatGPT to being able to really understand what it is that we're building, how it works, and how it's understood. We have to have a good use case, and we have to have a solid return on investment. But I really see it in three pieces. The context engineering piece, again, the data. It's how you're orchestrating this thing, how it's being managed, and then the governance piece. And that's what I really call the encapsulated AI. And we're seeing this play out in the real world. So when I say encapsulated AI, I'm saying we're bringing all this stuff into one area so that we can understand it. We've got the observability. And you're starting to see it, whenever you look at Bedrock. Bedrock is essentially encapsulated AI. They're starting to bring all these things together. Microsoft and AI Foundry, they're starting to bring all these things together under one thing so that you can start building tools inside of it. OpenAI just announced their orchestration. They're trying to bring all this stuff in and work in it. I think the one challenge that I have in all these cases is extensibility. Is as you start to grow in your workflows and as you mature as an organization, and Microsoft and Amazon and all of them will tell you the same thing. At some point, they're like, oh, you're gonna have to drop down to code. Like that's an extension of what we're doing. And when you drop down to code and you're outside that ecosystem and you're in Microsoft and you wanna ping some Microsoft documents, that's fine. You're in Foundry. But as soon as you kind of lose that, you lose that resiliency. Oh, go ahead. You lose that resiliency, from especially OpenAI. OpenAI just wants you to use OpenAI things. Bedrock, Amazon's kind of more generalized. How many people are in Bedrock? Kind of, or how many people are Foundry, Microsoft shops? How many people have done like OpenAI's new stuff? I guess it's basically brand new. Yeah. But in all those cases, like you're good within that ecosystem, and then to really extend, like I like them because I think they're good proof of concepts, and it allows you to kind of play with stuff. But eventually you're going to have to drop down to code, and you're going to have to actually build out an application, an operational app, and you're going to have all those components. And that's what's key. So what are those components? What do I mean by the encapsulated AI? This is my reference architecture. So I'm an engineer, so I'm going to have a reference architecture. A context plane. The context plane is like, how are you getting the data? How are you pushing this data into your application? So that goes back to my conversation on RAG and MCP. How are we reasoning and executing within this? How are we orchestrating this stuff? So the orchestration side, in the case of, are you using OpenAI's kind of orchestration? Are you coding it? Is it LangChain? Is it Crew AI? So those things. Deployment plane. There's multiple ways to deploy models. You know, you can use, you know, just to pick on Amazon for a little bit, because we're in Amazon, but it's like, you know, you got Amazon Bedrock, and you can certainly use a model within Amazon Bedrock. It's freaking expensive. You can also move that model to your own AWS kind of deployment and run it there locally. It's cheaper. You can make it run on Amazon Silicon and make it faster and even cheaper. You can move that locally, and you can run it on your own GPUs. And whenever you're orchestrating things, you got to take that into consideration. It's like, what is the model that I want to run? How big is the model? Do I need to use the big model that OpenAI has? Am I gonna steal this model down and run it locally so it's faster and it's cheaper? These are all considerations that you need to take into account. Monitoring and observability. That gets into, like, yes, I think we're going to get better at observing, and you guys know better than I, observing within the model itself or having some ability. But regardless, when I'm talking about monitoring and observability, I'm talking about it from the sense of within the application and the choices that it makes. And so that's the key thing. Assurance and posture management. I'm a big fan of, and I've used the term for a while. I've seen it a couple of times, but in the software world, we have what we call software BOM, bill of materials. And in the AI world, I think we're going to have AI-BOM. It's like, what's the bill of materials that my application's using? And the AI-BOM is like, what models am I using? What guardrails do I have deployed? What services am I using? And so that posture management, that AI posture management, is critical in order to evaluate the security. And then it's the last one, the financial operations plane. Again, it's like you're using one model and it's 12 cents, and another model it could be 2 cents. Which one do you want to use? So you've got to understand kind of token usage, minimize token usage. There was a good paper, I think it came out earlier. We talked about it earlier this afternoon, but it was chain of draft. And it's a good paper, a good research paper that, you know, there was a paper, chain of thought, which kind of started the whole reasoning, right? And then there was some guys that came out with this idea of chain of draft, which is you take something, you break it up into smaller components, and you're reducing the number of tokens. You're taking a big task and you're breaking it up to smaller tasks. And you guys do this, and you just don't even know it. Because back in the old days, you used to write this big long prompt, and you're like, it sucks at the long prompt. So what I'm going to take is I'm going to do smaller prompts, and I'm going to get answers, and I'm going to start combining them. So that's kind of that chain of draft kind of reasoning. Another great resource that I would say look at is how many people are familiar with Cloud Security Alliance, the CSA? Man, cybersecurity. We need some cybersecurity guys here. The Cloud Security Alliance is a great resource, and I'd pull it up. They created this AI control matrix. Yeah, controls matrix. But it maps, you know, there are some emerging standards that are coming out, NIST, ISO. I'm sure you've probably heard about it or you referenced it. The EU has some. These are all things that your security teams and your other, like, you just want to get to market fast, right? So the best way to get to market is to talk their language. To talk their language, you're going to want to, AISPM is, the reason why I put that up there is for the specific reason is that they kind of mimicked, well, I think we just came to the same conclusions, but they built their control deck based on controls around what's important to a model, if you're building a model. And they said, this is important to somebody that's a service provider that's building a tool to support an application using model. And they have specific guidelines for people that are building applications that are using tools to access models. And then they actually give additional guidance to people that are users of the AI. So this is probably the most complete doc, and they're still coming out with it. I think October is the first release date of some of the implementation stuff, and then they're having some audit standards in November. But it's definitely a resource if you guys are in this space and you're trying to build some stuff.